Hey folks, welcome back to the Contrarians. This is another regular episode of our Contrarian series where one of us picks a dark horse album from a band and champions it as that band's best album or favorite album, while the other person tells them what the sober choice is and why their choices are wrong. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like our channel. Check us out on Patreon. We got some really cool exclusive videos over there. So I'm going to throw it over to Martin. He's going to explain why he's picking this radical choice from this band for this episode.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Marco. So we're talking about Genesis today. And as you might be able to see behind Marco, my choice is going to be Abacab, but we'll get to that in a minute and why. And as I was telling Marco before we went on the air, I'm not going to be as apologetic about it this time as I was on the Who episode, because that was a really, really contrarian choice. This is pretty contrarian too, obviously. But yes, I'm not going to be as hedging on it this time. But anyways, so Genesis. Massive band, of course. One of the four-ish big prog bands. They toiled making pure prog for the longest time, but then things started looking up. They started their records started going gold. Peter Gabriel leaves the band and he becomes a massive star on his own. Phil Collins, the drummer, takes over on vocals, and he even becomes a solo star later as well. But that ramp up to Peter Gabriel, Steve Hackett leaves as well. We've got a guitarist, and he goes on to a beautiful, prolific, cool career as well. But Peter Gabriel's there through Selling England by the Pound, and then his last one is the double album Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. But then later on they radically changed their sound. They go kind of poppy, and a lot of electronics and a lot of synthesizers and programmed drums and things like that. And lo and behold, this whole change in what they do makes Genesis pretty big stars. They go up through the record I'm going to talk about goes double platinum, but then they go 4 times platinum, 4 times platinum, 5 times platinum. And then they have this one album called Calling All Stations where, Phil Collins isn't even singing on. So it's a new guy. I can't remember his name right now. But anyways, that album. That album is just sort of the straggling outlier. And then, of course, the band has been, more or less broken up. There's been no more records. And there's been a lot of drama in Phil Collins's life about divorces and his physical problems and that. And, the idea of touring and sitting down is coming. Well, right now they're talking about that again. Just this massive band that changed a lot over the years and became kind of big, modern music, pop, a lot less prog to what they were doing, sensations in the MTV era with a lot of big smash singles. Again, along with Phil Collins as a solo artist doing well, and Peter Gabriel becoming a big star as well. So there's your synopsis on Genesis. I am going to pick for my favorite Genesis album. And again, maybe a little bit like most of these episodes, do we need to call this the best Genesis album? There's no real reason to do that. I mean, I could argue for that because you notice a lot of like the rock critics and stuff really liking this album. So now we get into that abstract world of what is great songwriting, right? So let's not go down the best thing. I mean, when I talked about the Who album, Face Dances, obviously, I leaned a little more to this is definitely not the best, but it is my favorite. This time around, again, to concentrate on favorite, I'm going with Abacab. A little bit about this record. So this is the ramp up from Duke, where they really started changing their sound. But with this record, what they really wanted to do was discard anything that was not Genesis-like. They had bought their own studio, The Farm, and while the studio was getting renovated to go, they were writing in the farmhouse. So they had a lot of freedom in terms of time to put this thing together. And in fact, they came up with like a double album's worth of material. And later on, they had some B-sides that they had from this. What do we got here? So Nami Nanu is sort of like a total prog jam where they they just kind of repeat the title, but it's very proggy. It's kind of like old Genesis. Submarine is sort of the same thing, but it's a quiet instrumental. These were B-sides used later. But from these sessions, there was Paper Late, which was on the Three Sides Live album. an amazing live record for the band, and it is like Kiss Alive 2, 3 sides live and 1 side studio. And there's You Might Recall came from these sections, and that's an amazing, excellent song as well. And Me and Virgil, which is like a Beatlesque pop prog thing, another great song. So they had a lot of deep material from this record that came out later. But to go into this record, what I love about Abacab is this creative fearlessness. I know that's a theme on Contrarians a lot, but I really find that they really stepped it up in terms of being fearless, in terms of changing their sound, and probably ticking off a lot of the old prog heads, because this is really the purest of all the prog bands. They have very few eccentricities. King Crimson can be eccentric, Yes can be eccentric, Jethro Tull. Now we're even moving further away with the flute and all that, and the folkiness. This is about as purely prog as you get. Like if you look at as prog as a bicycle wheel with spokes all coming off in every direction, fusion, jazz, new age, metal, folk. Genesis was right there at the hub. I mean, they are about as progressive rock as you could get. So by this point, Hugh Padgham is in as an engineer, but it's a self-produced album. Okay, so they loved what Hugh had done on the likes of Intruder, working with Peter Gabriel in this gated radical drum sound. And also Phil Collins by this point has Face Value out, which came out in '81, and that's starting to do well. So to start with, I love the drum sound on this. It's practically my favorite sounding album in the world for a drum sound. I could just listen to these drums and these splashy cymbals all day, and the slight gatedness. It's not as radical on Peter Gabriel, and the grooves are generally pretty simple, but they're varied. There's a lot of different kinds of grooves and tempos, but what he does is simple, so you can hear all the clarity and those really cool tom sounds and the ploipy bass drum sound and that great, wide wet snare sound that you get, mixed in with electronics as well. And I think it's proggy enough to keep you interested, but also the melodies and the songwriting are really pronounced and a lot better on here. I love the opening track, Abacab. I think it's proggy. It's pretty heavy at times. It's got a lot of different parts. Mike Rutherford talks about how it's called Abacab because they had A parts, B parts, and C parts, and then they were moving around all over. And he says in the final version is nothing like Abacab at all. It's more like Acabak, with repeated parts in there as well. No Reply at All. They use the Phoenix horns, which is the Earth, Wind, and Fire horn section, right? And I think it's a great song. It's super catchy, but their idea there was almost to like shock the old prog bands with these braying horns. The idea was like a song that Michael Jackson might do, and I think it's great. There's just so many cool point and counterpoint things going on in the rhythm of it. Me and Sarah Jane is a Tony Banks song, and it starts mellow and maybe a little unimpressive, but when it picks up and the whole band crashes in, I think it's just an exquisite, beautiful little pop jewel. Keep It Dark, my favorite song on the whole album. What a great melody. So cool what they do with that, and it just keeps moving. It's kind of like a 2-bar drum loop thing, and just this gorgeous drum sound throughout, and just all the neat parts and beautiful melodies to that. Dodo / Lurker, 7 minutes 30. This is a very dramatic and proggy one, but again using a lot of these new modern rock tools, post-punk tools, you might say. Whodunit, really cool little weird Devo-esque song. Ahmet Ertgun from the label, he loved this song, and they even thought about releasing this as a single, which is pretty wild. But just a really weird, obscure little crazy song, and I think it's humorous, and I think the humor works. I think it's really good. Man on the Corner, this is a Phil Collins solo one, and it's probably my least favorite one on it. It's funny that it's a Phil song. It's got the least amount of drums on it of all of them, and it's most like his solo career, like Face Value in that. It's a little as I often say, housewifey, I suppose. So it's not my favorite. Like It or Not is also a ballad, and this one's a Mike Rutherford one. So Mike Rutherford is bass and guitars on this album, of course. And this one's like a 3/4 waltz feel to it. But but the production is a little more traditional, and it feels almost like one of the the Revelation ballads from the 76 through 78 period, and Duke, I suppose, as well. So great song, but it's like a full band ballad, so I like it more. The Man on the Corner. And another record, another great one. I love the drum sounds on here, and it's got, like I say, one of these simple beats, simple to do, and not much note density to it, but it's a novel beat that goes with it, and I think it's got some neat parts as well. It's got the keyboards in there sounding like the harmonica, but yeah, I mean, this is them making all these sounds except for these horns, and those horns are the first time they used outside people, for anything since the strings on the debut way back when. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, this horn thing I think was a nice touch the way they did it here, and of course they didn't overdo it. So yeah, not apologetic at all. I love this record. Everything on it is, a lot of the old stuff for Genesis, I love that stuff, and Lamb Lies Down on Broadway would probably be my second choice, and then Duke would actually be my third choice. But a lot of that old stuff, it's funny, throughout all these decades, I've played that stuff all my life, and it kind of never really takes. It never really, it's a little bit like Kansas for me. Every time I approach those records, they sound brand new to me again. So it's odd how I never kind of have that material sink in. And this stuff, I could just look at the titles and I can sing the whole song in my head. So there's something there about the abstract, greatness of good songwriting. And that's why I think the critics like this album a lot. But when you look at actual Genesis, I'm going to leave this to Marco, but when you look at actual, what the sober choice situation is, it's not one that comes up too high. The last thing I wanted to mention about this album, just a quick thing about the cover. So there's 2 vinyl issues of it. I think there were four different color schemes to this thing. And then it's standardized on 1 or something like that. But anyways, there's 2 of them. Not a great album cover. It's also embossed, which is kind of neat. So it's got that little feel to it. And here's your 3 sides live, where you kind of get the the extension. One side where you get the extension of the Abacab album. And I've got a lot of other props here too. Well, there's your Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I won't show you all my Genesis albums there, but they're all sitting here. Here's your later material, which obviously did really well as well, right? This one comes up pretty low as well. So there you go. Abacab is my choice. And Marco, tell me why I'm wrong.
So you're very contrarian on this one. To start off, I really like the song "Keep It Dark." That was probably my favorite on the album as well. You're right about "Man on the Corner." You kind of get those Phil Collins, like "In the Air Tonight" type vibes on it. It is kind of ballady. I did like "Dodo and the Lurker" as well. Another song that a lot of people like is "Me and Sarah Jane," and the title track too, right? I don't think there's any issue at all with the title track. I think probably that's the one thing that most fans of progressive music can probably appreciate about the album, like the chord progressions in the title track. And, it's probably one of the most interesting things on the record. And it's probably the thing that's probably the most accessible to, progressive rock fans, or at least classic Genesis fans, is the title track. So there was stuff I actually quite enjoyed on this. I think probably you're contrarian in a couple of ways too. Even your ranking of the albums is very contrarian, because in all of the research that I did, and when we had discussed doing this album, you had mentioned that you had gone on Sea of Tranquility and you had done your top prog albums, which if anybody hasn't seen it, go check it out. It's a really cool episode. And you had mentioned that you got slagged in the comments quite a lot. So actually, a lot of my research was going and looking at the comment section. And I'm going to kind of sum up and paraphrase what most of the issues that people had with your choice was. So I think probably the most offensive thing about your pick, about picking Abacab for your top prog albums, was that a lot of people suggested that Abacab wasn't proggy. A lot of the same themes that I saw popping up in the comments were that, it's like 80s synth pop, it's like pop rock, it's not really proggy. So a lot of people were offended by your choice of putting out, more so than I didn't see as many people slagging Abacab for the music. It was more like, this is not a progressive album. But
Yeah, Marco, if I could just jump in there for a sec, I mean, just
sure.
to relate to that as well. I mean, I what I've realized in picking this choice is I do like when these prog guys move on and they become, you know, literally progressive and progressing from being a progressive rock band. So there I had, you know, to my surprise, I picked King Crimson Beat as my favorite prog album of all time. I picked Peter Gabriel as a prog artist. I think Genesis is prog at this point. So I do like my prog later on when things happen to it. I mean, I love a lot of early prog as well, but I love Yes Drama and Going for the One and even 90125, right? So yeah, there you go. I mean, so it is. So I guess I'm finding out about myself that I do like these modern shifts with these bands. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, there were a couple of people that were like applauding you for picking Abacab. Even though some of those people were like, I would not put it in my top whatever albums, but you know, it isn't a bad album. Some people even said that it was better than the debut, but for the most part, yeah, some of the comments too were just like, how could you even say that without any context or anything? But a lot of people were very offended by your choice. Some people even suggested that Abacab was the record where they checked out of Genesis because of how poppy it was, or how poppy they perceived it to be. Even Duke, Abacab and Duke were both kind of put in that place. But it's interesting that you put Duke in your top three as well, because, you know, in the research that I did look at some ranking lists, and this is probably the most off you've been with your number one. Some ranking lists didn't even have the album on the list of best Genesis albums because they only did 10. So out of 15 records, this was like mostly 12, 13, 10. Ultimate Classic Rock had it as 9. Ranker had it as 12 out of 15. Return of Rock didn't even list it, and they did a top 10. Best ever
Marco,
album.
if I could jump in, I think at least one thing that everybody does agree on, the worst three almost always come out to be Calling All Stations, which makes sense. It's not Phil or Peter. We Can't Dance, which is the last one they did with Phil, which kind of always comes in with, and the debut. The debut was before they actually became a prog band. It's more like a folky pop 60s sort of thing. So those three always come at the bottom. But yeah. Right. Go ahead.
And the top three. And I actually went into the comment section of that Sea of Tranquility video, and I did kind of like my own rough kind of poll. I didn't take numbers because there was a lot of comments. I just kind of took a general, okay, which one of these albums are getting mentioned the most? So the top three were always Selling England by the Pound, which is I would pick as probably the best. I like the songs on there. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and Foxtrot were usually the top three. From what people were listing in those comments. A couple other ones that I saw, Nursery Crime got mentioned a few times, Wind in the Withering, Trick of the Tail. I saw Duke getting mentioned, but those three were the most mentioned. Those other three I just mentioned were kind of in the middle, and then Duke was always kind of like last. Those were I didn't really see any other ones in those comments as much as those albums. But I mean, like, I also took a look at some reviews. Prog Sphere just said that it was just an unfortunate Genesis entry into the catalog. They actually had some material left over from Duke that they was supposed to be on this album, but they ended up discarding it because it sounded too much of the material on Duke. So they ended up just coming up with a whole bunch of new stuff. But supposedly they were going to include songs from the Duke recordings or whatever. Prog Sphere just all over the place just doesn't like this album, calls it one of the weakest and most inconsistent Genesis albums, and basically said if you thought Duke was a step away from the classic Genesis sound, then this album goes even further. Yeah, compared to like Foxtrot, I found was more mellow than this album. Like this album was kind of rocking in a lot of places, like you had mentioned the drums and stuff like this. I thought Foxtrot was mellower. But definitely way more progressive. I felt it was more progressive from my ears, you know, especially with like Get 'Em Out on by Friday on Foxtrot. I think, you know, they absolutely tell a great story in the 7 minutes that song was, than probably any stories I really got from Abacab. I kind of didn't really get sucked into any of the songs that way. Same with
It's funny, Marco, to mention, the shift in sound. I mean, this is quite stark, but it's amazing how bad the album covers get at this point, right? Because look at, there's Duke. Okay, so we start with that. That's kind of cool, whatever. Then we go into, of course, Abacab, right? Three Sides Live. You've got Genesis. I mean, literally almost all their album covers are really cool, right up to Duke. And then this is how it ends up. This is how we go out. Right? Every single one of them is crap. Just terrible album covers, right? So it's funny. So when you see the sound change with Duke, you also see the album covers, and I think that triggers people. I mean, it's part of the whole package, right? Prog. And the other thing is they didn't put lyrics in Abacab. They wanted to, that was on purpose. Tony Banks says that was on purpose to make people focus on what was going on in the music kind of thing. So that was a shift to some version of modernity, right? But the gatefold albums with all the lyrics and the concept songs and the great album covers, it ends and you get one of the most remarkably bad strings of album covers in all of rock and roll to close out the career, right?
But I like Selling England by the Pound. I like the signal. I know what I like. I really like the instrumental a lot. Even the last track on the record, Isle of Plenty, was even though it's a 2-minute song, I thought it was pretty cool, actually, that one. With The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, I mean, like, the songs on that, In the Cage, back in the NYC, it's a powerful song. And then you have the Carpet Crawlers. I've seen people talk about how groundbreaking that record was when it came out. And even The Colony of the Slippermen. I think people you did mention the vocals and Phil Collins' vocal performance on this record. And I think people, when you go back and listen to The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and compare the vocal performances, I think most people would head and tails put Peter Gabriel's performance, especially from like The Lamb Lies Down to Abacab, but they would totally rank that performance better. To me, it sounds more progressive. Those other albums sound more progressive to me. Yeah. I did understand when I saw a lot of the comments that were calling it like synth pop and like pop rock and all this stuff. I did feel that with listening to this album, but I did like quite a few of the songs, and I liked the production. I did feel like the song, like even the songs that were longer, just kind of seemed like normal songs with just longer solos or like longer instrumentational parts, right? I think people are getting the sense here that this is kind of more of a like the Genesis sellout album, or that Genesis was starting to kind of become the backup band for Phil Collins. And you'd kind of even mentioned like the sounds more, or at least The Man on the Corners, that's definitely a good example of it sounding more like Phil Collins solo. My least favorite track on the record is probably Who Done It. I mean, like the lyrics are kind of silly and the music is just repetitive, and it just kind of ends up being not a standout song at all for the wrong reasons.
And the other thing, Marco, I mean, you can't fight the legend of Peter Gabriel as well, right? So you've got Selling England by the Pound in '73, single album. And then you also can't fight the legend of Peter Gabriel combined with a double studio album. So Lamb Lies Down on Broadway just looms so large. I mean, it's the one I always see wins polls when I take polls about this stuff. And literally, I see that album win polls as the second greatest prog album of all time after Yes, Close to the Edge. So there's another thing. I mean, you're up against that. You're up against the purest prog band there is. You're up against a long string of great albums with really nice production, but traditional production, great playing. So yeah, I mean, it's very understandable, but like I say, I mean, I just feel that I love to see them move forward, and that's what they say. When progressive guys get their back up, they about this kind of thing, they say, "Wait a minute, being progressive means moving forward, right?" So I've no apologies about loving this record. I think it's great, and like I say, from a sonic point of view, I could just listen to the production all day on it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I think probably, like I said, I think the people's issue with you picking it is, I guess it's just, it's not a classic Genesis sounding album. And I did see Selling England was the one that I saw topping the charts most of the time. Frog Sphere basically praised every song off Selling England, except
Yeah.
they called the Battle of Epping Forest a dud, which I kind of like that song. But basically, you are very contrarian on this one, and a lot of people were very offended by your choice, more so because it seemed like they just felt it wasn't progressive. But even in the ranking lists, you're very contrarian. I don't know. Is there anything we're missing? Is there anything?
No, I don't think so. I think we can pretty much wrap it up. I mean, literally just tell us what you think in the comments. I mean, let's see what happens. I would like to see the the feelings of these 2 or 3 solitudes in this band. So yeah, just join us in the comments, and yeah, please think about the Patreon situation, and we looking to see what you guys think. So for Marco and myself, bye for now.
That's it, dude.